Hello students. Today we're going to look at chapter 10, section 6, solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Now we've solved quadratic equations in lots of ways. We've graphed them, we've factored them, we've done all kinds of things, but sometimes none of those ways work. And we have to go back to the one way that works every time, and that is the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula looks scary, but it's really not. Once you learn it, you'll learn it for a lifetime. So what is the quadratic formula? The quadratic formula is x equals x, because you know we're always looking for x. Our solution, our zero, the x-intercept, all of that. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And the first thing you're probably asking is, where's those a's, b's, and z's come from? Well, those are from ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. The a, b, and c that we learned to pick out before. And we just plug those puppies in and let our calculators do the talking, and that gives us our solution. Excuse me. And you're wondering, do I need to memorize this formula? Absolutely, you need to memorize this formula. It's a fun formula to memorize. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. I've known it for a very, very, very long time. And I have a teacher friend, Mrs. Robertson, who's no longer at our school, who taught me a song to help memorize the quadratic formula, and I'd like to teach that song to you right now. And it goes something like this. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. You kind of want to do a little dance with it when you do it. So let's do that one more time. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Now I know you're singing along with it at your house and singing along with it wherever you're sitting watching this video. So let's do it one more time, because I want you to be able to sing it when we come to class, and we'll just kind of have a chorus of the quadratic formula. So it goes again. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. If any of you want to do a little choreography to that song, come teach it to me and we'll do it all together or something like that. Okay? So there it is. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Notice that b squared minus 4ac is all under the radical sign for the square root. So let's do a little bit of practicing and figuring out, well, how do we actually use this to find x? So I'm going to give you the first one, x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 0. X squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 0. So what is a? A equals 1, b equals negative 8, and c equals 16. Well, you can imagine that a formula this large is going to take a lot of room. So I'm going to remember that a is 1, b is negative 8, and c is 16. And we're going to erase 1, negative 8, and 16. I'll write it over here. A equals 1, b equals negative 8, and c equals 16. So now let's plug those in. X equals the negative of b, which would just be positive 8, because the negative of negative 8 is positive 8, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 8 squared is 64, minus 4 times a times c, which is 16. Okay? Over 2 times a. So I plugged in my a, b, and c into my quadratic formula, and now I'm going to just keep going. So x equals 8 plus or minus the square root of 64. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, and negative 4 times 16 is negative 64. So that'd be 64 minus 64 over 2. Well, x equals 8 plus or minus the square root of 0, which is 0, so I'm not even going to put anything else, over 2, so x equals 4. Now you're probably thinking, but Mr. Cohen's, x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 0. Some of you figured out a long time ago that's a perfect square trinomial. And you could factor it, x minus 4 squared equals 0. So x minus 4 equals 0. So x equals 4. You're exactly right. This is one of those cases where I would have factored it, but I wanted to also give you an easy problem to show you how to use the quadratic formula without any crazy decimals and all that kind of stuff. Because typically when you use the quadratic formula, it's because nothing else was helpful. So we're going to get deep into the crazy decimals and everything for this. Well, here's our next example. But before we do, let's sing that song one more time. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Great. I hope you were singing along with me. 2x squared minus 7 equals x. Well, the first thing we have to do is put that into standard form so that all of my digits and variables are all on the same side, and it equals 0. And they're in order like a trinomial should be. So I have 2x squared minus x, because I have to bring the x over to this side, minus 7 equals 0. So now let's identify a, b, and c. A equals 2, b equals negative 1, and c, that should be a c, equals negative 7. So now I'm going to take those and I'm going to plug them into my quadratic formula. So x equals the negative of b, which is 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 1 squared is 1, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times negative 7, over 2 times 1. That's wrong. That's over 2 times 2, because a equals 2. So I have my a, b, and c all plugged in correctly, and now we're just going to keep going. So x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 1, negative 4 times 2 is negative 8 times negative 7 is positive 56. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8 times negative 7 excuse me, is positive 56. So 1 plus 56 over 4. And then I'm going to do one more step, and I'm going to let my calculator do the rest. X equals 1 plus or minus, why am I having a problem with that little symbol right there? Plus or minus the square root of 57 over 4. Now in this case, the square root of 57 is not an integer. So I'm going to let my calculator do the walk-in, but I have to set up two equations. The first thing I'm going to plug into the calculator is going to be x equals 1 plus the square root of 57 over 4, and x equals 1 minus the square root of 57 over 4. And those will get me my two solutions. Now I've already done these, I've already done the calculations, I put it into the calculator, and the answers that we come up with are negative 1.64, x equals negative 1.64, or it also equals 2.14. So those are my two solutions, 2.14 and negative 1.64. Obviously those have been rounded because we came up with some crazy decimals when we plugged this into our calculator. I'm not going to make you sing it again, but I bet you thought I was going to. Our next problem is x squared plus 7 equals x. And you're wondering, isn't that the one we just did? No, it's not, because we had minus 7. And we're going to see, does one little symbol make any difference? Let's see. So I first have to write it in standard form, x squared minus x plus 7 equals 0. Now let's pick out a, b, and c. A equals 1, b equals negative 1, and c equals 7. Okay? So I forgot something. That's supposed to be 2x squared, so a is actually going to equal 2. My bad, it's early in the morning. So a equals 2, b is negative 1, and c equals 7. So now let's plug those into our quadratic equation, and let's see a quadratic formula, see what happens. X equals the negative of b is negative 1, so it's still 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is negative 1 squared, which is positive 1, minus 4 times 2 times 7 over 2 times 2. So again, we just plugged in A, B, and C in the correct places. And so x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 1. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8 times 7 is negative 56. So minus 56 over 4. So x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 55 over 4. And I bet you're thinking to yourself, whoa, Mr. Cohens, you can't have a square root of a negative number. Well, you're exactly right. You can't have a square root of a negative number. So this is no solution. Anytime I get a negative under the radical sign is what we call the square root sign. Anytime I get a negative under that radical sign, there's no solution. I can stop. I don't have to keep going. No solution. So that, my friends, is how we use the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Memorize that formula so that you can plug it in whenever you want to. Now you're thinking, can I use it whenever I want to? Absolutely, unless the instructions tell you differently. So here are your two practice problems. What I need you to do is identify A, B, and C after you put them in standard form, everything on the same side. Then use the quadratic formula to solve them. 4x squared plus 7x equals 15, and 5x squared plus 9x minus 4 equals 0. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Take a picture of your practice problems, showing your work, and submit them through Edmodo.